You've probably heard that jingle 100 times if you live in the United States. Ozempic belongs to a class of drugs called GLP-1s, which science voted as breakthrough of the year. They're expected to be a $100 billion opportunity by 2030, so you're probably thinking about how you can invest in them. Well, we're going to cover that, but we're also going to look at how Ozempic and other drugs like it might affect other names in your portfolio. First, I'm going to tell you a story about a faraway place called Nauru. So Nauru happens to hold two titles. One, that it's the fattest country in the world, but it's also one of the smallest countries in the world. So as you can see here, the Vatican City, which they consider a country, is the smallest, followed by Monaco and then Nauru. I took this picture on a plane flying into Nauru, and this small island is remarkable for lots of reasons. The first probably being that 72% of the population is obese and 95% is overweight or obese. And the story behind it is just absolutely fascinating. So they mine phosphate there, and that means that at one point they were the second richest nation in the world by GDP per capita. There's plenty of stories that go along with that, one being that the chief of police bought a Lamborghini and had it shipped over. And when he tried to get into it, he was too fat to get into the vehicle, so it ended up just sitting there on the lawn and rotting. They imported loads of Land Rovers, so you can go there and see, or Land Cruisers, you can go there and see plenty of those. They had so much money that people would go and with a $50 bill to the grocery store and not even take the change. And now, I think back in 2017, they're one of the poorest countries in the world. But Nauru people see obesity as a sign of wealth. And when I was there, I was able to check out the beautiful landscape, small as it was, and the phosphate mining operation. And this picture here, that's me on a cannon that shot down a B-52, and you can see that picture in the center. I'm right by the engine there, and as it turns out, that B-52 is it had an engineer on board who was from my very small hometown, so it was quite fascinating. I took a piece of that bomber to bring to his family if I can find them. And on the right, that's me. That's the Ministry of Health. That's who I stayed with. So there are plenty of fascinating stories to accompany that trip. But we're here to talk about the miracle of GLP-1s, which may bring some hope to Nauru peoples, and certainly their diets. By the way, the reason that they're all so fat, I didn't mention that, is not because they had tons of money to blow on food, but because all the food they eat, there's nowhere to grow quality vegetables or to have livestock, so they eat largely just canned food, processed foods, and that's what processed foods will do to you. So GLP-1s, these are a class of drug that's known as a GLP-1 agonist. An agonist is a drug that works by acting like a substance that your body naturally has. So you could see GLP stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, which is a hormone your small intestine makes. When blood sugar goes up, GLP-1 encourages your body to make more insulin to lower blood sugar, and these drugs do the same thing. So basically, they just keep you from having a very big appetite. They make you feel less hungry, and that's it's kind of the opposite of the munchies, if you will. And they also keep any food you eat in your GI tract for longer, so it takes longer for you to feel hungry again, and they send signals to your brain telling you that you're full. Now, there are some downsides to this miracle weight loss drug. They can come with side effects, including nausea. They're costly and may not be covered by health insurance. We'll talk about that. And you may need to take them indefinitely to maintain your weight unless you make other lifestyle changes, and lots of people aren't. And we'll talk about that. Because they're relatively new, it's not clear also how they're going to affect your health over many years. So here you can see sort of a timeline of weight loss drugs. This is from a report by Goldman Sachs that we're going to cite, and thought interesting there, lower left, methamphetamine used to be a weight loss drug, indeed a very effective one, until they withdrew it because of the high risk of abusiveness and addiction. Never mind, they spun it back out as an ADD drug, Adderall, and you can pretty much get in the States fairly easily methamphetamine over the counter. In the upper right here, you see circled a number of drugs that have kicked this off, and there's quite a few GLP-1 sort of drugs. I took this from a research paper in 2021, so they've been around for a while. You can see these different pens. Now, I suppose it's fashionable for people to give themselves injections. I didn't know that was a thing, but there's been a recent onslaught of these anti-obesity drugs, and of course, diabetes drugs being used off-label to lose weight. And Why now? Well, as I said, this class of drugs has been available for a decade, but only recently have they started becoming very effective in helping you lose weight. So the first generation of GLP-1s led to about 6.5% total body weight loss. Now then the next generation, the second one, approved in 2021, that includes Ozempic, of course, the trade name for the treatment of diabetes, and Wegovy, the trade name for the treatment of obesity. Now we're moving to 15% total body weight loss. And then they cite here this other dual agonist combining GLP-1 and this other thing I can't pronounce that the FDA approved in November 2023 that helps you lose about 22.5% of your weight. So to put that in context, if you weigh 200 pounds, you could lose 45 pounds. That's crazy, right? And that's leading to some strange conditions, one being Ozempic face. And if you look at this hideous picture here, it shows you that just because there's a drug out there doesn't mean that you should start taking it, because some of the side effects may not be so obvious, mainly that it makes you look like a Holocaust survivor. Now, this chart here I thought was interesting for a number of reasons. So first of all, more than 40% of U.S. adults are obese, up from 30% 2 decades ago. It's a big problem in the United States. So there's 130 million possible patients in the U.S. alone. But look at this chart here. A couple things to note. First of all, notice how Wegovy has a minimum age of 12. So now we're no longer talking adults. We might start being able to treat overweight kids with this drug. You see overweight being one of the prescribed usages, but look up there in the middle, heart disease prevention. So as it turns out, these drugs are useful for that purpose. And suddenly, as we say, that's some people say it's a miracle drug, right? Because it does a lot of things. It treats diabetes, it helps prevent heart disease, and it helps you lose weight. So why wouldn't you want to take these things? And they're selling an awful lot of them. Here are some of the brand names. The generic name, remember we talked about the different types of GLP-1s, and the indication. You see, so weight loss is starting to creep into the equation, though that becomes tricky because, as we'll talk about, some insurance plans don't cover weight loss drugs. But the three popular ones now, Ozempic, Mounjaro, and Trulicity, drove 70% of sales in 2023. Now, Fierce Pharma did an article that's interesting, which talks about how there's going to really be two big winners. So by 2029, this firm Global Data says a total of 5 drugs will be monopolizing the GLP-1 market with 83% of sales. They cite Eli Lilly here with Mounjaro, Novo Nordisk with a number of other indications here, and they say the global market is going to reach $71 billion by 2032, with Novo and Eli Lilly each accounting for 45% of its sales. So they appear to stand to benefit quite a lot. You can see at this list of the largest pharma companies in the United States, they sit right there at the top. So they're only presumably going to get bigger. And Novo Nordisk is interesting because they happen to be one of the top companies in our International Dividend Champions report. So if you're a premium subscriber, annual premium subscriber, you have access to this report. We just put this out fairly recently. It's a universe of 45 international dividend champions. Those are firms that have not only paid, but increased a dividend for 20 years or more. And you see there at the top, they're ranked by Q-score. At the top there is Novo Nordisk in 4th place. Novo Nordisk stands to benefit, and there's a lot of speculation around other digital health companies, for example, that are going to capitalize on the GLP-1 boom. It's probably worth a look at other beneficiaries, whether they're primary or incidental, but we wanted to touch today on GLP-1 disruption, and I think this came into the limelight recently. We put out this subscriber trade alert for Dexcom, happens to be a medical device company we quite like. I think 80% of the revenues come from consumables, but they saw a 40% drop in share price for not really any good reason other than some weakness, and the market saw that and pounced, claiming that perhaps the GLP-1s out there are creating some problems for companies that help treat diabetes, right? So this makes a whole lot of sense. We think about disruption. There's a lot of speculation around this, but some of it definitely has merit, it seems. Food, of course, snacks, sodas, alcohol, and fast food are all said to be disrupted by people that are just going to be eating and drinking less. Diet regimes, so Weight Watchers, Herbalife. Why would you need to go on a diet when you can take a pill? And they say that Weight Watchers is actually trying to pivot into special Ozempic meals. Gyms and exercise equipment. What about Planet Fitness, Peloton, publicly traded firms that may take a hit from this? Medical procedures, liposuction. Why pay for that when you can take a pill? Of course, we mentioned Dexcom. Now, can you think of any other industries or companies that might be impacted by GLP-1s? Just put that in the comments section. So this piece by NerdWallet was quite good late last year. It pointed to a number of firms that have been talking about this. So you have Kellanova focusing on how these new weight loss drugs might alter dietary behaviors. You have Barclays saying to short sell stocks for junk food companies. Walmart said that people who fill GLP-1 prescriptions spend less on food. Pepsi's keeping a watch for any potential headwinds. Nestle, I know that they're working on some meals specifically for people that take GLP-1s. The Krispy Kreme, the donut maker. I mean, these are obvious companies that might be impacted. Now, there's a report by Goldman. If you're really interested in digging in, they talk about GLP-1s quite extensively. They're expensive and insurance coverage is limited. So a lot of this is forward-looking, but they're claiming it's only a fraction of the billion people worldwide who have obesity that will take this, though they think it could grow to a $100 billion market by 2030. And what's interesting is they talk about how GLP-1 adoption could meaningfully boost U.S. growth. And they warn that expanding insurance coverage for these drugs could cost the U.S. government a staggering sum. If you're a premium subscriber and you want this report, it's not easy to find. We'll send you a link. Just reply to any email that we send you, and we'll send you a link to this report. So 2 charts taken from this report. You have the one on the left showing how poor health subtracts over 10% from U.S. GDP. On the right, it shows how GLP-1 medications could actually boost U.S. GDP. Quite interesting. Now, when you think about these drugs, and if you've taken any sort of drug that results in rapid weight loss, then you know the problem. You got to keep taking it, right? And this report here looks at just that. It says that after taking these drugs, participants regained 2/3 of their prior weight loss when they stopped taking the drugs. That's actually not bad. At least they didn't get fatter, as in the case of methamphetamines, the legal methamphetamines in the States that create problems with dramatic weight loss shifts. But they say that ongoing treatment is required to maintain improvements in weight and health. Now, I found this interesting stat. Roughly 1 in 8 U.S. adults have taken GLP-1 drugs. That's from The Independent. I don't know if that's true. It seems like a rather large number. Of course, the other option here is to exercise some self-control and try really, really hard not to eat so much, because clearly we see that's the problem, right? Eating too much and you suddenly lose weight. Well, that tells you something, right? So we looked to AI. It's becoming quite mainstream. We should be able to start asking questions, and asked it about adherence. They say here, pointed to a number of interesting stats. They say 85% of patients stop taking these drugs after 2 years. They say that it's because people don't stay on them long enough to see their effects, or because they experience side effects. These could be reasons. A Blue Cross Blue Shield study showed 58% of people stopped taking them within 3 months. And a Fortune study found that more than 30% of patients stopped taking GLP-1 drugs after 4 weeks. That asks the question, is this more of a passing fad? All you need is some sort of side effect that becomes apparent over time that would shift consumers' attitudes about these drugs. So don't get too excited. But when it comes to insurance coverage, this is a big part of the bull case, and Medicare's prescription drug benefit, that covers roughly 50 million older Americans. It's currently legally barred from paying for weight loss drugs under the theory that obesity is the result of lifestyle choices rather than a medical condition. About 87 million Americans who use Medicaid, that's a different story for them. Medicaid's allowed to cover obesity drugs, but not required. So there's some interesting dynamics there. Now, when we look at where the lion's share of our assets are held in Quantigent's, our dividend growth strategy, I think there's a number of names in there that might be of concern when we think about disruptive impact. Of course, consumer staples, intuitively Pepsi and Coca-Cola, maybe more so Pepsi. I think they have more snacks than Coca-Cola. Consumer discretionary, McDonald's, we recently saw some weakness, right? Though that was blamed on the old macroeconomic headwinds, but that's interesting to watch. And healthcare, Medtronic has a diabetes division. How's that going to be impacted? So these are things to think about and pay attention to. So just some concluding thoughts here. Nauru, that story teaches us the importance of eating healthy food. That's why it's the most obese country in the world, is because they eat nothing but junk that comes in on a ship once a month. GLP-1s show us that eating less food is better. So we need to improve the quality of food we're eating, and we need to eat less food in general. Eating less food and healthier food leads to healthier people. So the U.S. is crazy about solving problems with pharmaceuticals, and GLP-1s aren't necessarily a one and done. Remember that this may or may not be something that sustains itself in the long run, though this article here from Nature talks about how cheaper versions of these blockbuster obesity drugs are being created in India and China. So watch out. Maybe there'll be someday when we say, remember when people used to diet? Perhaps that will be something that we say, or perhaps this will just be a passing fad. But if you're interested in learning more about Novo Nordisk and the potential of that company, it's quite interesting. They made it into this piece on the best dividend stocks in Europe. So give that a watch next. We dig more into that company. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this today.